I need to pay off these student loans. I need to be like on a career trajectory. And then I don't know, I think it was, divine intervention or something, but I literally applied for like 40 things, and I got no interviews, by the way, from all those jobs. And finally I saw one for an ethnographic researcher on LinkedIn. And I was like, oh, I don't know what they're talking about in this description, but I can do ethnography.
Welcome to the Grad School Sucks podcast, where we believe that your life and career after grad school should rock. I'm your host, Matt Carlson, and today I'm talking with my good friend, Dr. Savannah Young. Savannah currently holds the role of Qualitative Marketing Analyst at California biotech company Illumina, and prior to that, she has held several research-related roles in industry settings. Now, Savannah is my friend, and I might be a little biased, but I believe that her career path is an excellent example of something that grad students should seek to emulate if they are skilled in qualitative research and want to continue to use their research skills outside of an academic setting. Savannah's industry career has allowed her to continue to refine her skills as a researcher, gain a fairly competitive wage, and have a good work-life balance, something that may interest a lot of grad students out there. I'm super excited about this episode. One minor note before we start, you may hear a slight buzz during sections of the episode when I'm talking. This is because the headphones I was using were complete garbage, and the microphone had a little bit of feedback coming in. So I've since gotten better equipment, but I apologize for the poor audio during parts of this episode. If you end up enjoying today's episode, please like and subscribe, leave a comment, and write a review. If you know someone who could benefit from listening to this podcast, consider sending them today's episode and let them know why they should check it out. And if you're listening to today's episode and not watching it, try the video version of the podcast on our YouTube channel. Anyway, I'm so excited to be able to share my conversation with Savannah with you today. Be sure to stick around to the very end of the episode to hear her responses to our bonus questions. And without further ado, let's get to the episode. Savannah, thank you for joining me on this call this morning. Everyone, welcome to the Grad School Sucks podcast. Today we are interviewing Savannah Young, Dr. Savannah Young. Savannah, would you give everyone just the elevator pitch of who you are professionally now, what you got your degree in, what you do for your job, that kind of a thing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Savannah Young. I got my degree in psychology from Valdosta State University, my undergraduate degree in 2012. Ooh. And then right after that, I went to University of Georgia and pursued the doctorate in human development and family science. And that's where I met Matt. And I graduated in 2016. And then I immediately moved to California and took my first big girl job, some people might say, full-time salaried job in California, in the Bay Area, as a design researcher. Ethnographic researcher is actually the title I had. Pretty amazing. And since then, I've kind of stayed in the corporate industry life. That was a consultant job, my first one. And then after that, we moved back to the Southeast to be closer to family as we started having the babies. And I joined a company, a corporation, I guess, an insurance company, as a design researcher on their marketing team. And that role was starting to pick up around 2017, 2018. I started seeing titles for that pop up on LinkedIn. And anyway, was there for 2 or 3 years. And now I'm recently, in this year, joined Illumina, which is a genetics biotech company, a pretty large global company that's based in San Diego, California. And I'm on their market research team.
Awesome stuff. And we're going to dive into all of that. And I think you have such a unique story. But before I get ahead of myself, let's start from the beginning. What drew you to grad school initially?
It's a pretty gloomy story, not very exciting, but as a psychology major, in undergrad, it's just I just have reflected on it, and I shouldn't have been in college yet. Everyone should just go and live life a little while. But here I was in college. I was 18 or 19, 20 years old, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And started as a journalism major. Somebody told me that was going to be a horrible life. So I was like, well, I'll just go do psychology, I guess, then, because I can do a lot of different things with that, I guess, right? Um, I loved it. I loved learning about the brain and how people think. But everyone then told me, and I'm very impressionable, everyone then told me, well, you can't do anything with this. You have to go to graduate school now. So you're going to be a psychologist, right? Or a therapist. And I was like, ooh, I don't know if I can pull that off. But I'll go to graduate school. So it was sort of, I didn't feel like I was ready to really decide a career path. I didn't have the financial means to just start traveling. And so I just went, I applied to different graduate schools. I was a very ambitious person. I thought, I'm just going to go ahead and knock this out. Like, I want to eventually get my doctorate, right? So I'm just going to knock it out. Looking back, I think I would have told myself to do things a little differently, but it did work out, and I learned a lot in the process. And graduate school was an a wonderful experience for me, and I don't regret it. But you kind of get, after a psychology degree, you sort of get told to do a lot of different things, and so I'm glad I had some good mentorship and good advice about the Human Development and Family Science program, because it really had many different career options within it. And so that's why I wanted to pursue that.
Very cool. And while you and I were in the same cohort, correct? We started the same year.
I think you were one cohort behind me, I think. But
Were you getting your master's while getting your PhD?
yeah, it was something like that.
Okay. That's what's mixing up the waters for me. What did you do your research on during your time in graduate school?
I got interested in doing research with refugee families. So there were some a local community of resettled refugees from, most commonly, Thailand and Burma. And I've always been interested in people from other countries and other cultures, and I just really wanted to leverage that opportunity to get involved and see how I could contribute, I guess, to their experience and learn from it. It felt like a meaningful thing that I could participate in as a graduate student. Also, I wanted to collect my own data. I didn't want to use a data set that existed already, especially being a qualitative researcher. So I started doing research with a community of resettled refugees on how they use food to integrate their family and continue to kind of maintain the ties to their culture, and kind of just as a resiliency factor. And then that was sort of for my master's project. And then I also continued kind of the idea of like resettled people and people who have been forcibly moved in my doctoral data dissertation couple years. So I actually partnered with the global health team at UGA. So I was HDFS, Human Development and Family Science, and Global Health. And we said, there is something happening right now, the Syrian refugee crisis and the war in Syria. So I wanted to see if I could understand what was going on with these people that were forcibly being moved. And so I actually collected data in the Middle East, in Israel, on those families who had been forcibly moved to receive health care in Israel. So this idea of like, what happens when a family is forcibly moved? How do they deal with that? That was sort of like the common thread of all my research.
I remember that. I don't remember if I went to your defense or some other time you were talking about it, but that was such an exciting project to get to hear about. Um, yeah, was there some conflict going on over there actively while you were there?
Yeah, there was. It had kind of peppered down a little bit by the time I actually traveled to Israel, but they were still receiving people at the border from Syria. So between Syria and Israel, the border, and they were pulling them in and treating them in the hospitals. And so I actually conducted like a qualitative and quantitative mixed method study in hospital settings with these patients and with the doctors, mostly with the doctors who are treating the patients, to understand what that was like and how all the different pieces to that puzzle. Because I just figured, like, this isn't a moment. There's a lot of subtext between the Syrian people and the Israeli people in general, like historically from way back, obviously. Um, and this is a moment that's very kind of interesting, but also we may see repeat itself globally a lot, because there's always people across borders that are having trouble with each other. And then you also, as a healthcare professional, are asked to treat them and to help them when you can. And so what's that like? And this may happen again. So I wanted to understand that and try to use that as the crux of the research question. How are they getting through this process of treating people that historically have been their enemies?
Yeah, man, that's amazing. So while you were doing your research and going through graduate school, did you have like a point at which what was your outlook on your career? Kind of like at the
Yeah.
beginning of grad school, and how did that morph over time?
Yeah. So, okay. Um, this is where my naivete will show a little bit. But I thought, my strategy was, okay, I have this experience now with refugees, but I still don't know anything about anything. Like, I'm still just like this. I can't go, I thought I can't go teach people. And I just had this gut feeling that I know that's kind of expected to go from getting your doctorate to being a professor, but I was so young. I had just gone straight through school. Um, and I had some big experiences. I could have taught people probably, but I didn't feel like that was the right thing to do at the moment. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go then work for the United Nations, and I'm going to become like a diplomat or a researcher. Well, they don't have researchers there. I mean, they might now, but at the time, like, they weren't paying people to do what I could do or what I thought I could do. I was still so green. Like, there's just, and this goes back to like this, what I hope we start to talk about is just this like lack of practical help in terms of like what it looks like to actually make money after you graduate. um, there's just no assistance with that. So you just have to kind of make it up as you go, and that's all right. But so I get my doctorate and everything, and I'm looking around for jobs that would pay me money to do research with refugee families, and there's just not any. They're all volunteer work because it's a philanthropic, charitable cause. There's not a lot of people that will pay you to do that. So that's what I thought I was going to do. But then my my who became my husband, we got married, and he wanted to get his master's in data science. So we started kind of figuring out what we could do after, this phase of graduate school for me. And he wanted to move to this program that was in San Francisco. So I started looking for jobs out there. Everything I was applying to was, I applied for like at least 40 jobs, and they were all like, with nonprofit agencies working with refugees, but nobody was doing research. It was like, help the refugees, like go take them to the doctor and everything. And I thought, well, dang, I just got this doctorate. Like, you know, I want to do that. Maybe I can do that also, but I I need to pay off these student loans. I need to be like on a career trajectory. And then I don't know. I think it was, divine intervention or something, but I literally applied for like 40 things, was getting and I got no interviews, by the way, from all those jobs. And finally I got one. I saw one for an ethnographic researcher on LinkedIn, and I was like, "Oh, I don't know what they're talking about in this description, but I can do ethnography. I've learned how to do that." And so we took a big risk. We moved out there with no jobs, and I got the job, and it was, I think that the people who give us our first job are a special breed. And if you ever get the opportunity, if I ever get the opportunity to give somebody their first job, like, it's a very special thing, because they set me up for success, I think. And they took a risk on me. Even though I had a lot of skills that I was bringing to the table, I was very green. I didn't know anything about a lot of things. So I think that's just something I always reflect on, is that those people who give us our first jobs,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes so much sense to me. Um, and I just got my first post-academic job. Uh,
Congratulations.
Thank you, and I'm starting next week. And literally,
Wow.
I feel like a young kid again or something who's, showing up to class for the first time. Um,
Yeah, go get some school supplies.
I know, right? Uh, so what was that first job like? What did you end up? Oh, actually, sorry, let me back up. Why do you think you got that first job? Did you ever ask them about it? Like, what was it
Yeah.
about you that stood out?
Yeah. So it was a very small consultancy in Redwood City, California. And it was at the time 5 men, and they were all older than me. I mean, much older than me, probably like 45 plus, um, advanced in their careers. And so I'm like 22. No, sorry. No, I'm probably like 20. No, I'm 26 or 27. Um, and I come and do this interview, and I tell them, like, this is all the research I've done. This is how, like, and I sounded, I'm sure, very academic and very idealistic about research and about quality and data and integrity and all of the things that we learn in graduate school, especially in qualitative, to how to, conduct an ethical interview and all these things. Critical theory, I remember bringing that up. So they entertained it, and they appreciated my energy. Um, and then they're all qualitative researchers too, and so it was a qualitative boutique firm. Like, that's what they do, and they continue to do it to this day, for companies. But they were telling me, this isn't, like, we understand academia. Some of us came from academia, but this isn't academia. Like, are you willing to sort of learn how to apply it to, like, companies and corporate settings? How do you feel about doing research for a car company? Like, that, is that interesting to you? And I was like, yeah, that sounds interesting. And I just was, I'm all about it. Whatever I could do, I was ready to do it. And but what they told me later got me the job, which is, this is ridiculous, but this goes to show you how it goes sometimes. Um, they asked me what kind of TV shows I like, and I remember talking to them about Orange Is the New Black. I said, I'm watching Orange Is the New Black, but it's really sort of maybe too much for me. I'm realizing, like, it's a little dark for me. And it was the why, the not just the TV show. They don't. That's fine, but they wanted to know why I felt the way I felt about it, and they wanted to dig into that with me. And so we explained that, and I explained that. And one of the principals, founders of the company, just ended up telling me one time, like, that's what put me over the edge for him, is that I could critically think about and be very self-reflective about things, and explain myself, tell a story. So you never really know what's what they're looking for. But you do have to be yourself, and I remember that's a takeaway. I think you just have to be yourself, and unfortunately, we think that that's not what we need to do, but at the end of the day, it is. And if you just continue that thread, you'll get the right opportunity for yourself. Otherwise, you might get something that's not a good fit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Um, so in this process of getting this first job outside of academia, I feel like there's a lot of like lessons to unpack, and I feel like we're already kind of doing it. And I know you have material that you've prepared from other talks on lessons for transitioning into um, industry. Where do you kind of feel like the next step is? Because we can go more into your
Yeah.
career and the steps since then, or we can go into things that you learned from this job. What are you feeling right now?
I could talk a little bit about that transition, like transition from academia to corporate research, and just the different types of things that I had to, and I'm continuing to build and learn.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do it. I mean, it sounds like a lot of the qualitative stuff that you learned at UGA really came into play, but of course it's a completely different world, and I assume you might have experienced some kind of culture shift or something like that. Does that sound
Yeah. So,
right?
like, and the company where I worked first was called Point Forward, and essentially, like, I just spent a lot of time talking to them about trying to figure out what design research is, because that was what they kept telling me we were doing. We're doing design research, and I had never heard that term before. Um, and I was like, where did this come from? In academia, we have books on where, paradigms of thinking and where philosophies of thinking come from. Like, where did this come from? I'm really like trying to understand it. And, I had to, and they helped this one person at the company who was an academic previously. Like, he really helped me. He was fine to kind of dig into that with me. But I had to sort of realize that, like, what I learned in academia, a lot of things in terms of doing high quality research and asking those hard questions and not being afraid to, um, you know, chase after a rabbit in terms of their interview. Like, okay, you pick up on a marker and you feel like you really want to go down that path because you think there's something there. What I did not really have skills to do was, and I think unfortunately in academia, we're just not really given the tools to do this, but we would come back from the field and we'd go off and do like 3 weeks of field work in different cities and collect data and do interviews. And I was really like comfortable with that. We'd come back from the field work and have about a month to put together the report. And that report included, deliverable that was essentially like the culmination of the data collection, the analysis, and then they call it synthesis of the data. So all of this meant working with our clients. So like for the car company example, like working with the people from the car company, these car people, like, this is what we heard. You were with us on some of these interviews. We think it means this. We think, you guys need to start thinking about your roadmap, your product roadmap, and creating a truck that looks like this. Or whenever you do think about your next set of products or trucks, try to keep in mind that people really value this and this is why they value it. And so that was like a whole new skill for me, figuring out what, not only like this is the beautiful data and the story, like here it is. They don't that's fine, but like they want that this much and they want what do we do with it this much? Like tell me what to do now. And then because when they report it to their higher ups and their executives and their product managers, they're going to say, okay, we learned from the research that we're going to pursue this product, and if you want to know why, I'll send you the link to the document. Nobody cares why. Like, that's for us to. They might care, and if you have to
Yeah.
convince somebody like at the company, like they might want to dig into the research, but really, the work is so much about telling that story as you're creating the deliverable, like working with your clients and saying like, we think, are you on board with this? This is what we would suggest based on what we've heard. Now, none of that, and I've done that kind of thing since I started at that job, but I didn't do any of that in academia, right? Like, we just wrote what we heard, and then there's like a paragraph at the end, implications, and you include the word policymakers should ... right? That's it. So that was like a huge learning for me, and I think that, I don't know how to start teaching that in academia, but I think it could be valuable for people who stay in academia, for people who go into corporate research, whoever. But like, how can we think about the action from this? What are we going to do? And how do we make a recommendation? How does a researcher even have the, balls to make a recommendation like that? Like, that's what we have to figure out. And because people want to believe you, you have the PhD, you have the master's degree, you're the researcher, and as a consultant, you're selling that expertise to them. The executives at Ford or whoever, or Coca-Cola or whoever hires you, they hire you because of your expertise in doing research. And so when you give them a recommendation from the research, they want to believe you. So you have to be believable. And all of that was stuff that I had to learn how to do.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And that's so interesting that the justification or whatever was this much, but then what do you actually do with it was what they really wanted to know, and that's the meat of what they wanted to know. That's so interesting, and it makes a lot of sense. Um, did you have any experiences that you can share from that first job? Maybe like working on a
Yeah.
project or something like that you
Yep.
found interesting.
Yeah. And you know, um, I'll share something. that job was amazing. I had amazing people I worked with. And they were all men. Like I said, like I could have had a bad experience, but I actually had a really wonderful mentorship, friendship, collegial experience. They respected me, as a young woman. It was a good experience in that way, and I have to give them gratitude for that. But the clients, on the other hand, so we had a lot of different types of clients. We worked with healthcare, we worked with car companies, worked with insurance, various types of research projects. But the car guys, I call them the car guys because that's how they like to refer to themselves. They're an interesting breed. And I was doing this one interview, and it was a really hard interview. We were in Texas, we were in Houston, and I remember the woman, like I can picture her face. These were in-home interviews, and oftentimes, like if I'm leading the interview, I have a colleague who's filming it and taking notes and doing all the logistical things. But I'm focusing on the interview itself. But also in the room, if they would like to, the client is invited to come. So we had these like 2 or 3 guys from the car company come to these interviews with us, and it's encouraged. We like that because it helps them hear what we're hearing. It helps them own the research. But that interview was hard, and I think I like to think 80 plus, 90 plus% of my interviews go really well. I've gotten really good at this, but that one didn't go so well. That lady she was very hesitant. She was very uncomfortable with all these people in her house. And it was really hard to get her to open up. But I did my best. Well, after that interview, the client, they didn't think they kind of had some words to say to my boss. Like, I'm not sure she can really pull this off. Like, let's let you do the rest of them. That hurt my feelings, but that was my first year. I was learning, and you can't win them all. And so after that, I really grew a lot. I think in taking criticism and kind of understanding how to work with people who may not really respect you or may not see you in the same way they see other people. That same client, they were a consistent client. We worked with them a lot, and they were nice enough, but they also would make comments like during workshops, like, "Can you get me a cup of coffee?" Or, "Savannah, are you going to go get lunch for everybody?" Things like this that sort of made me feel a little bit like I try to think the best of people, but I do wonder about like how much they respected me because it's a room full of men and then me. Um, and I had already had that one experience with them. So there are things like that that did happen, but not very often. And every time something like that happened, I found a couple people at the office who I could debrief and walk through that experience with me and grow from it, and also realize that on the consulting side, it's it's hard because you're selling yourself, you're selling your expertise, and I need to kind of grow into some bigger shoes. I need to be more convincing. I need to have a little bit of a more maybe, I don't want to say more professional, but more it's almost like I need to believe what I'm saying like way more than I do. I need to just own it so that they then believe me. And I think I had to grow. That was a growth for me. I think graduate school can be so wonderful, but it introduces so much self-doubt. You're constantly presenting to people who are tearing you apart. You have 2 or 3 professors in your camp that are, shouting your encouragement from the rooftops, but then everybody else at conferences, your peers, you're applying for grants that you don't get. Like, you're just introduced with self-doubt constantly, constantly. Like, am I really enough? Is this really enough? Did I do this right? God forbid you have to go in front of the IRB and, put your case in front of them for research. Like, I was still feeling a lot of like self-doubt. And when you're in that consultant, or even like the role I'm in now at the corporate level, like, you got to learn how to overcome that self-doubt and believe in your skills and abilities so that other people believe you. And I know I'm circling right back to that, but I think some of those stories that made me feel so vulnerable during those first couple of years are the direct result of like not fully believing that I had what I needed to do this.
Was there a time when you started to believe that you had what it takes and you were the one in charge of what you're doing and,
Yeah.
you were the expert and people needed to listen to you?
I mean, I think it's a constant thing that that I have to. I don't know if it's just me or if grad. I can't blame it all on grad school. I think, but it's something that I know about myself. I want to. I want to listen to others so much that I have a hard time like then um, being so assertive myself. Sometimes I'm just like absorbing, absorbing, absorbing. But that's the important thing about doing, research on the corporate level. Like absorb and listen, but then you have to like tell everybody else in a way that's a succinct story. Um, and you have to believe it. And so I think I'm constantly still working on that. I've gotten much better. And I know that that's an expectation. And I also know that that's most helpful, right? Like I want to help my leaders. I want to help my stakeholders. And so I have to trust that I'm doing my very best job collecting data, listening to people, synthesizing data with them. And so if I trust that and I like remember that I did learn all these skills in graduate school and I do apply them and I have high integrity and high quality work, I have to just lean on that and come to a place where I believe that. And I do believe that now. Now it's, using that basis of understanding, 5 or 6 years later and going from there and sharing what we learned. This is what we learned. And sometimes in qualitative research and quantitative research too, right? Like numbers don't tell you everything, but there's always limits. And so you have to say, this is what we heard, and this is the people we heard it from. Go forth and do what you will with that. We recommend this because this is what we heard. In a year, it might be different, but you have to own
Yeah.
what you hear, and you can't just be in a place of self-doubt. That's like the worst quality of a researcher, I think, is self-doubt, because then
Mm,
other people don't know what they can
yeah,
believe.
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, when did you know, when you were at this consulting firm, when did you know that you were ready for the next job?
Well, like I said, my family was, I was having my first baby. And so my husband had also graduated from his program, and California, that job was amazing, like a unicorn. It was, and I look back on it, there were obviously issues, but I was traveling a lot to do field work. And there are still many roles like that, like especially for entry level qualitative researcher jobs, where you travel a lot and you collect data in people's homes internationally. It's like an amazing opportunity, but it wasn't going to be a good fit for being like a mom of a baby with a husband that was trying to get a job as well. Like it didn't seem to be a good fit at that time. So I knew I needed to think about how I was going to make this work. And so we made the decision to move back to Georgia. And I actually had like this crisis, and I said, I'm just going to work at a nonprofit and live on campus. It was like a church camp that I grew up going to. It was really beautiful, on the coast. And my husband, like, Will, you can go work in Jacksonville, and we'll be fine. Like, we'll just live at this little on the river. It'll be beautiful. But um, I did that for about 8 months, and then I realized I was not very happy. I really did want to do research. And so that was a moment. It was. I look back and it was a real blessing because I was able to be with like my kid a lot more than I thought I could. But I was very fortunate to find another job um, that was for an entry level sort of research position. It was in Nashville, Tennessee, and so I said I knew I wasn't happy. Like this was really when like the self reflection like started for me, because I really took a risk, like leaving California, leaving this career, and kind of saying like I'm gonna leave all that behind, and we're gonna just live a simpler, smaller life. But I wasn't happy. I wanted to do research. I was still feeling like I wanted to do hard researchy things, and so Will was on board. And he said, "Okay, you're not happy. Like let's try this." And we moved to Nashville, and I joined the insurance company, the general insurance company, and I was their like first and only researcher doing kind of market customer research for them, and that was another amazing opportunity. So it was very different. It was like in a company. I wasn't a consultant anymore. I had to learn. Like one of the first critiques I got was like, which you just have to take these critiques, and they hurt, but they're so good for you. Like, they hurt so bad, but they hurt so good. So my boss's boss, so, like, I wasn't used to that. I came from grad school. I was working at a consultant where everybody was kind of like the same. And then I was all of a sudden have like layers of bosses, and it was very new for me. And so like my second tier boss, like a VP, pretty high up guy, met with me, gave me some, tips, welcomed me. And he said, you've been here about 6 months, and you're doing great. I want you to work on, and the things he asked me to work on, I thought were ridiculous. Like, he told me he wanted me to work on my email etiquette, how to like send a cohesive email with a request and an action item, like these things that you have to learn to thrive in a corporate environment. He wanted me to learn how to manage a project. He wanted me to take a project management course. Like, these are things that I thought, but you hired me to do research. And he's like, and you're really good at research. Like, I could never do that. What you need to focus on to thrive in this environment and to excel your career at the corporate level are these business related skills. So ding, 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 another thing I didn't learn in graduate school. So that job was amazing, and I learned so much. It was incredible. I was doing mostly quantitative research. I was working with vendors, and they were, making sure we understood the question we needed to answer. They were giving me decks, and I was regurgitating them and formatting them and telling story to the marketing team. Like, this is what we heard from all of the people that we're trying to sell our product to. Like, and they were using that to make decisions. It was high energy, high pressure. I was reporting to like the CEO at some point, the CMO. It was amazing, like amazing opportunity, but it also kind of burned me out a little bit. And so that's why I made the transition to work on a bigger team at Illumina. I was the only researcher at the General. It was wonderful. I was held in, I think, a very loving place with good mentorship and good criticism. I've always been very fortunate to have good mentors in my life. But I knew that it wasn't sustainable for me. I was working at night. I was like harboring a lot of stress before big presentations. I just felt like a lot of pressure was on me, and it became too much after COVID and everything. It just kind of got a little much for me. So I started looking for a growth opportunity. I wanted to join a bigger team with other people, a bigger company, see what else I could do. I also wanted to get like away from insurance for a while. I was starting to like just crave a new topic. And so, hey, here's genetics. I know nothing about that. And so I thought that was going to be a fun experience. And they were looking for, and I was actually headhunted through LinkedIn. So never ignore that. I've gotten
Very cool.
all three of my jobs through LinkedIn. And a recruiter reached out to me. He said, my client's looking for a qualitative researcher, and I see that's in your profile. And I was like, oh, snap, definitely I'm a qualitative researcher. Tell me more. And he started telling me about it, and I was like, this is really great. I hope I can pull this off. And so I did. So I joined the team, and since then I've been doing actually a little bit of qualitative and quantitative research. But you join, they think they need one thing, they have budget to hire somebody, they hire you, and then, hey, you want to stick around? Like, we need this now. The business needs change, and you flex a little bit, but there is a limit, and so you have to find people internally to work with. Like, I'm a qualitative researcher. I can tell the story from mixed data. I can get I can get a report, and I can understand it, and I can put the story together and weave in qualitative insights. But I don't do statistical testing. Like, just ask Dr. Oshri. It's very hard for me, and I don't do it anymore. So I had to find somebody on my team who does do that. Luckily, she wasn't being leveraged in that way, but I said, listen, this is a great opportunity for you and I to work together. I can tell the story and lead the project, and you can, crunch the numbers and help me put together the data, and also elevate your role, right? Because you aren't doing this right now, but it's a skill you have. Let's show them what you can do. So that's how that can also happen. Yeah, it's wild, the corporate environment. And especially now at such a big company, everybody's going through a hard time right now. There's a lot of layoffs happening. I want to show my worth. I want to show my value. And every day I wake up and I'm, very thankful for my job, but you have to kind of roll with the punches too. And that's different than like the academic tenure track thinking.
Yeah. And I feel like one thing that I'm hearing kind of through these three different job experiences you've had is in academia, we're very much like, this is my research area, this is my method, it's the only thing I do, I get very good at it, and maybe you branch off a little bit and evolve from there. But it sounds like in your corporate experiences, it was much more like, this is what we need, can you do it? And you figure it out. And maybe you shift, you were ethnographic and then you shifted into something else, you changed topics. It seems like there more flexibility maybe is demanded in corporate or in industry than in academia. Would you say that's accurate, or am I missing things?
No, you're totally right. It's so hard because you want to identify, like I was taught in academia, like I heard everybody saying, I'm a qualitative ethnographer, or I'm, everybody kind of like latches onto this identity at conferences and things, and that's how you introduce yourself. And I'm an expert in this field. And I thought, well, that's what I need to do. And I mean, you can still do that, right? Like, there's no cut and dry, but for me, I have to reflect every year, like what skills do I have, what is important to people, and I kind of, if I watch my LinkedIn and I try to see like what story am I telling about myself on LinkedIn, even like those words that you use to explain who you are. Some people embrace like I'm a qualitative researcher. At the time when I got this job at Illumina, guess what? It said qualitative researcher because I knew that's what I wanted to be doing next. But now it says like curiosity, strategy, and consumer research because, that's sort of more aligned with what I'm doing. I am doing qualitative, but I'm doing other things. I'm thinking about strategy, like where do I want to be going next? And so you can always, reinvent yourself. You just wake up and it's all about, how you want to be perceived, and it's not betraying yourself to like one year lean into this qualitative research person and then the next year lean into the strategic thinker. It's not betraying anybody. You're not lying. Like we are very complicated and full of tons of different skills, but where do you want to lean in to tell your story? And that's a strategic decision too.
Yeah, I feel like I'm soaking in things for the future for myself. So, uh, so looking back on these three experiences you've had, the first job is such a huge transition from academia, it sounds like, and then you had the other job at the General, and now you're at the Illumina working on genetic stuff,
Yeah.
which is crazy cool. So I assume there's a lot you could share in terms of takeaways, things current students should think about. I think if I'm identifying the audience correctly, most folks are going to be in graduate school currently, and most are a little undecided on what they want to do with their career moving forward. Um, so what advice, what takeaways, what things should people start thinking about now to prepare for the future?
Okay. So I'm going to go back to something that I harbored on a little earlier in terms of, you know, uh, reflecting on all the things you can do really well. You asked me a question a while back. You said, like, what's your superpower? And that's a good thing for people to think about. What skills do you have? Reflect on those and uh, think about yourself the way your mom or the way your biggest fan, your major professor, if they're encouraging, like think about yourself the way they think about you. And if you have a hard time, go ask for that feedback. And give them some prompts like, what do you think I do really well? Where can I improve? What are some of my strengths? Like really focus on those positive things that you skills that you have that set you apart. For example, a few things that stuck out to me that I felt like coming out of grad school I was able to do. So I could think critically. I could think a little differently than the society would ask us to think. I would like come at things from a different angle and try to criticize it. Thank you, Dr. Kogan, right? Like he was always like, but what's the other story here? Um, Also, you have this like ability to go through the scientific method. You can think about all the steps involved and where there might be a hole and where we can improve the quality of something. That's really important. Ethics. I mean, that's a big hole in corporate America and consulting, because consulting, you're trying to win projects, you're trying to get money. So you're bringing a lens of ethics that is increasingly important and increasingly getting attention at corporate environments. So you have that. So those are some examples of things that you have. You also have like presentation skills. If you've been presenting at conferences, you have teaching skills, you have charisma probably. So all these things. Then I've brought it up several times already, but just the things that you don't have, you can acknowledge that. You don't have to like labor on it, but where can you kind of find some experience? Maybe you can present your research to the Rotary Club or to business people, and get some feedback. I'm going to warn you, it's probably going to be like, well, so what did you do with this? And that's what they're going to want to know. Like, tell your story in terms of like what you did with it. And if you didn't do anything with it, like, what does that mean? It may not mean, it may just be, you can just acknowledge that. Like in academia, this is where it stops. But I want you to know that like one thing we could have done, or one thing a policymaker might want to think about, but you can actually think forward enough to make some recommendations. But yeah, get in front of some business people with your experience, and learn how to even just send emails and read emails and interpret executive speak. Like, it's very different. Just get some experience. You don't have to be an expert or anything. And then, pay attention to your LinkedIn. If you don't have a LinkedIn, you definitely want to, I can only speak from my own experience. There's a lot of people that don't use it, but I've gotten 3 really good jobs with it. I've networked with it. I think it's a great tool, especially in the research world. And I can't recommend it enough. And then in terms of I don't know if a lot of academics, I think, do tend to be quite organized, because you have timelines you have to meet, data you have to organize. But organization and project management and time management, setting a goal, okay, we have to work backwards from here, is something to keep in mind for business research roles. And then finally, the last thing is, that self-doubt. So when you get your feedback from your mentors and whoever, like, that might help, but just begin to reflect on that. Maybe it's not an issue for you, but I think it's hard coming out of academia. Like, you're just bombarded with critics. And that's so good, right? Because they're really wanting to make you the best, and they want you to think critically about your project and what you're saying. But also just reflect on how, use that to your advantage to make your ammunition, or your presentation or your data, like, the best it can be. And then when you take that into the I'm going to go get a job now environment, you need to believe how wonderful it was and how hard you worked and how you can do it. Because I guarantee you, like, if you've been through an academic program, like, you're going to be miles ahead of a lot of, people who've gotten their MBA, which is another totally different skill set. But in terms of thinking about ethical data collection and data quality, you have that skill, and that a lot of people don't have. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. There was so much there. And if I could go back for a little bit, you mentioned LinkedIn. And LinkedIn was something that I did absolutely nothing with in grad school. And today I think I read a statistic that 70 to 80% of jobs, at least in the US today, are found on LinkedIn and not on other sites. And I got the job I have now through LinkedIn. It really is crazy how important LinkedIn is for folks. So if you're a listener out there right now and you're in grad school and you are leaning towards having a career in industry, LinkedIn is definitely something to think about. So in terms of practical takeaways, if we could think for a second about the qualitative researchers out there listening, I've gotten the impression, so I'm more of a quantitative researcher. I love crunching numbers, and so that's kind of my world. And I probably have blinders on because I just kind of forget that there's other stuff out there. So qualitative, uh, I feel like there's an impression that there's not opportunities for qualitative researchers out in industry. And clearly from your story, that's absolutely not true. Um, what would you say to qualitative researchers right now who are in grad school? They're thinking about their opportunities out in industry. What should they do right now to prepare for opportunities in industry? What should they think about when the time comes to apply for jobs? Anything like
Mhm.
that.
Okay, so yes, there are lots of jobs for you in the industry. Qualitative research, if you look it up, it's all over the place, whether it be on the consulting side. A lot of it is market research. A lot of it is future thinking, design research, those kind of words, strategic thinking. Those aren't the only things you can do as a qualitative researcher, but they're certainly the terms that I see coming up. If you're there now, like focus on just, I mean, this sounds cheesy, but like keep a journal on how you're thinking about your research, how it can, always push yourself to understand the decisions you're making. When you do qualitative research, you're making decisions about who to talk to, when to talk to them, why you're even thinking about this question and asking it to them, and how you're interpreting it. Maybe you're working with people in a different language. Like there's lots of like very human, complicated, messy stuff going on. And all of that is stuff that they want to hear about. I've interviewed with Facebook twice, or Meta, um, and for purely qualitative research roles. And I got all the way to the final round, and they ask questions like, they want to know, and all the big tech companies want to ask these questions about like, all right, we want to understand, or this is the problem we have. How should we do research to solve it? Like people in, I got asked this question, like, was it people in India? We've noticed through quantitative data analytics, we've noticed that there's a decrease in people from 20 to 40 years old using Facebook in this part of India. How should we do research to figure this out? And I'm interviewing for a qualitative role. So I think they're expecting me to come up with a qualitative research plan, but I didn't get the job. But that's the kind of questions that you get. And so I think the more you can, if you're in it right now and you're having all those wonderful, juicy, critical thinking moments as a student, and you're thinking like, why should I do this and not this? Why would I do it this way and not this way? Like try to write that stuff down and really focus on those decisions, because in my experience, getting these big tech roles, they want to know why you talk to that sample, like why that kind of person. What are the ethics behind that? What are the complications you might face because of that sample population? How will you extrapolate those findings to a larger population? Can we extrapolate them? Like all these very messy questions, but that they want to see how you think. So the more you can reflect on how you think and be able to tell somebody and be confident in it, I think that's going to set you up for success. But I highly recommend, all those people from Meta and Facebook on design on LinkedIn are like extremely kind and open to connecting with you. So I actually spoke to several when I was in my interview process, and everybody's just extremely open. A lot of them have moved jobs, Amazon, Meta, Netflix. Now they might be at a consulting company, whatever, but they've had success in, telling that story and getting that job. So highly recommend, you connect with them and hear from them what kind of experience they had. So yeah, you can't reflect enough as a qualitative researcher and be able to tell that story, because I think people are interested and there are jobs. What else? And then the other, practical things you might want to do is create your LinkedIn profile. I have an online portfolio that I created as well, like a website. Some jobs, when you apply, like they actually, it's a required input is your portfolio website. So then you have to have a portfolio website. But you don't have to make all that until you're ready to kind of start grad, that last semester after your dissertation is done. Just focus on like high quality, really good research, interesting stories. Somebody told me that in graduate school, like if you want to get a good job, just have a lot of interesting stories to tell. And that's not bad advice.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So for the folks who are in grad school,
maybe folks like me who I had no idea there were jobs, in data outside of academia. Don't know why I didn't know that. I was naive. I also went straight through. I didn't take a break between undergrad and master's or master's and PhD, which looking back, I would have advised against.
Yeah.
Um, but so these qualitative research jobs in industry, can you share like what kind of a pay range are people looking at?
Yeah. I mean, I'm fine to share where I started and, um, I don't think it was right. I think I should have pushed. So first thing, California, like it's crazy expensive out there. Our rent, we were in a duplex, a 2 bedroom. It was over $3,500 a month for rent. Rent. Um, yeah. So more than the recommended 30% of my income was going to that. But I was given an offer, my first job. I did not negotiate. The offer was like $75,000. Did not negotiate. Just said, "Thank you." That was so stupid. God, just kill myself for that because that actually set me up, and I have to give myself a break. Like I had just had 40 applications not get accepted, and I was having a crisis, and we were moving to California, and like I was just so happy to have something. So of course I accepted it, but please negotiate at least a little bit because that then set me up for, okay, well, my next job. And remember, I took that break. So we moved from California back to Georgia. I took this break, and that kind of made me think, oh, like, oh gosh, I'll just be happy to get anything. And I only got the offer at 85, which wasn't good enough either. Um, I negotiated a little bit. I got a little bit of a bump. I think I got up to like 90, but it wasn't for salary. It was like a little bonus. Like you can have a $5,000 bonus when you start. And I was like, okay, but hey, like again, I'm trying to break back in. I've been on a break, and that's not bad actually in the South. I'm going to be grateful for that and see what happens. Um, and I did negotiate, so I was proud of myself. I tried. Um, and then I moved. I was there a couple years, a year and a half, and I started looking around, and I was like talking to some other people. Your network is important, right? Who are some other people not at your company in similar roles? Ask them what they're making. Like if you're friends, like ask them if they can share. It's so helpful because that was how I figured out, oh, like I've got my PhD. I've been in the industry for about 4 years. That's 10 years experience. Um, I should probably be like asking for more money because my friends are over here at like 140. Um, so I actually had to like put together a proposal and present it to my manager about like a pay adjustment, not a promotion, just like I was like, I don't think I've been here long enough, or I'm not sure we're ready to talk about a promotion, but I need to like negotiate my salary. And she was very amenable to that and very happy to have that discussion with me. And she vouched for me, and it did put me over. It got me to like 110. So I'm being very transparent, but I just think we have to talk about that. And so this was a Nashville based company. I was an individual contributor making about 110. There was a nice bonus twice or once a year, and I had great benefits. And now I took a new role, another individual contributor role based in California, but they adjust it for living here in Georgia. And um, I have friends of mine who are applying, and it's crazy. Like it's all over the place. There's a website called, I'll have to send you the link. It's called like Open Salary or something.com, and you can look at what all these people are making, and it's anonymous. So the role that the headhunter, this qualitative researcher role, he was very open with me about the salary range. He said they're looking to pay between, I think, 130 and 140. And I said, well, that's going to be nice because, the role sounds less stressful. It sounds like more money. And I also want to learn something new and have a new experience. And so that's where I'm at like right now. And I have a friend who's an individual contributor for a startup, and she went from 150 to 175. So it's all over the place. She's a quantitative researcher. I don't know if there's a difference there. I don't think there is. I don't think there has to be if there is. But I think somewhere between 100 and 200, it starts to slow down after 150 pretty significantly. But 100 to 150, I think you can expect that you should feel really good about that. My own opinion. You should feel really good about that, especially if you can kind of come out of grad school and achieve that. But it's not always going to be like that. And you have to start somewhere, but just negotiate, and if you're not happy, like apply for something else and keep looking.
Yeah, that's wisdom. And thank you so much for sharing the numbers. I I was talking with Allie, and she talked about her specific numbers, and then she talked about this movement called like financial transparency in the workplace. It was something I had never heard of, but and I always got the feeling that like talking about salaries in academia felt weird, and then talking about salaries out in industry while you're in academia was like extra weird. Because it's like, oh, you're thinking about leaving the cult, huh? But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I feel like that's so important for the people out there who just don't know, or they don't have someone in their social network, or they just haven't been exposed to information like that before. So I know we're getting close on time. Um, I have a question, and then something I wanted to throw out there, and then of course if there's anything else, I'd love to add it in here at the end. The only question that's in my mind is I feel like there's probably people who are sitting in grad school right now, and I'm thinking about me back in the day, and I would have said or questioned something like this. And they're thinking about why they got into grad school. You know, they got into grad school because they had a passion for something, or there was a problem out in the world that they wanted to solve, and that their like idyllic mindset is probably going to go through some bumpy times when they see a fairly thin academic job market, and then they look over to industry and there's more opportunities, but that idyllic mindset about like I'm going to do my passion and I'm going to like save the world, they don't really see that reflected out in industry. What would you say to people who might be struggling with that kind of like a, I don't know, identity crisis might be an exaggerative word, but
I don't know what to say, honestly. It's hard. That's a hard place to be. I was there. I was working with refugees. I thought I was going to work for the United Nations and help refugee families. I do very little with refugees now. I have friendships that I made back in graduate school with those families in Athens, but even those have kind of like diminished as my family has grown and as my life has gotten busy. I think passions are like a gift, and I think we have to use them and think about them and think of and I think that self-reflection is it can be so important because I think we can be very hard on ourselves, like, oh, I got into grad school, but just remember, like, to give yourself a little bit of a break. You're probably gonna have student loans. You have to pay for those. If you have a family, like you want to take care of your family, give yourself a break. There's other ways to contribute. If you want to remain and find a way to carve that path with whatever you're passionate about, there's plenty of people doing that. I don't know what Allie's doing, but I feel like she's probably doing that with the mental health kind of stuff that she was passionate about. There's plenty of ways to kind of remain passionate, whether it be through now I can give a lot more to I contribute a lot of money to refugee organizations, for example. I don't give a lot of time anymore, but I give a lot of my personal money to it. There's ways to leverage your passions, but just it's hard. It's hard. It's a hard moment to be in, and I understand it. And if you can keep looking, you can try to you can do whatever you think you need to do. You can join the Peace Corps and go do that, and I think that's fine. Like there's no wrong way to do it. But also, like, give yourself a break if you feel like that's not for you right now either.
yeah. Yeah, and that not for you right now. Um, Something I was thinking about as you were talking, and then you even mentioned giving money to the causes you were passionate about. You gain so much more leverage the further you go in your career, and whether it's money or like the ability to kind of guide an organization's thinking, or
Yeah.
the ability to get a job in a field you want. Um, and so that to be able to say like not now to those passions and the problems in the world you want to solve, and to kind of like grind out the hard work to grow your career, to be able to be in a place where you can leverage it and say, okay, now is my time to
Hmm.
focus on this passion or this problem. Um, that makes a lot of sense.
But I will
So,
say
okay,
it.
go ahead. Yeah.
Last thing, you can you even though you're doing the thing that I just described, which is like figuring out where you need to prioritize your life, and that's okay. Like maybe I can't work at this nonprofit. I'm making like I can't even pay my student loans back, whatever it is. But you can always have values, and I think we should always have values that we don't sacrifice or we don't allow ourselves to dip below. There's going to be companies that you might not believe are doing things that are ethical. You might have trouble. Like when I was interviewing for Facebook, I had trouble with that. I was like, I don't know if I get this offer, will I even be able to do this? And I had trouble with that. But I'm now I'm for example, like I'm working for a company, Illumina. They're paying me well. I'm doing really cool work. It's kind of slow. It's not like changing the world every day, but I'm working on some like really amazing projects that I think will influence healthcare, right? Like I feel it's a it's a self what's the word? Like a self prophecy bias or something. Like I'm doing it. I want it to be good, so I'm going to say it's good. There's obviously going to be problems with anything, but I actually when I look back at like I was in car insurance and there I tried so hard to like figure out how I could help people who need car insurance. Now, that I kind of ran out of juice there a little bit. And now I'm over here and there's a lot of problems with like cancer and everything and there's a lot of opportunity and this industry, this company is really trying to create technology that can help people with cancer. So like there are opportunities to work, to make money, to do, to have a family, do these things and not sacrifice like you don't feel like you're selling out. There it can be done. And if you have to sell out for a little while, give yourself a break and like pay off your loans and go chase your dream after that. But like just people need to give themselves a break because I think everybody in graduate school just we're so idealistic and we don't want to never go below, your values, but also just give yourself a break.
Yeah. Give yourself a break. That's such a great reminder. Um, so we're running near the end. So the
Yep.
last thing I wanted to say, and then I'll give you, a chance to plug away at anything you want. And it was, I have viewed your career outside of academia from afar. I saw you get your first job whenever I was like a nobody on LinkedIn, hadn't filled out anything. Um, and then I saw you get the second one, and then this third one, and you really were kind of the prototype for me starting to think about that I could have a career in data outside of academia. And from there, I started to think about like, oh, like data analyst stuff, and then I started to dig into, oh, R, I need to learn R. I should have learned R years ago. Um, and yeah, and whenever I started reaching out to people to kind of help see if there were, openings at places that people knew about or were connected with, you and Will were like the first people that I chatted with. And those, while none of the places he was connected to had like an opportunity that worked into anything, those conversations certainly prepared me so much for the job I got now, which is pretty, parallel, healthcare, data,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So anyway, I just want to say thank you. Really appreciate it.
That makes me so happy.
Is there any final word of wisdom you want to leave people with today?
No, I think I've said all my words that I have. But I will send you this. Okay, I do have this final advice that I got. My favorite advice that I'm leaning into right now. It's from my mentor from a program that I joined, like a random mentorship program that kind of went nowhere. But she did give me this one piece of advice. She said, in corporate environment, consulting or whatever the industry you want to call it, the best advice I can give you is be bold, be brief, be done. And I was like, oh, and that changed that. I swear I heard that like in February. And I feel like now I use that for my filter for everything. I'm sending an email. Is it bold? Is it brief? Then I'm done with it. Be done. Tell them the thing, get over it, move on.
That's great.
I love that
That's awesome.
advice.
Well, Savannah, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. I feel like people are really going to take away a lot of nuggets from this. If folks want to get in contact with you, is there a way to get in contact with you? Or do you want them to connect with you on some sort of platform?
Yeah, just connect on
like
LinkedIn. That's the best place.
Okay. Dr. Savannah Young on LinkedIn. The current job would be Illumina, correct? Yep. Okay. Thank you so much, Savannah.
Thank you,
Really
Matt.
appreciate it. It was great talking to you. I'm sure we're going to have more conversations in the future about this.
Yeah, hopefully. All right. Talk to you later.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Folks, thank you for listening to the Grad School Sucks podcast, where we believe your life and career after grad school should rock. I loved getting to catch up with Savannah and hear about how her qualitative research career in industry keeps growing. I hope a lot of you gleaned wisdom and inspiration from her story today. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, I think her career path is something that a lot of grad students should look to as a template if they want to do qualitative research outside the walls of academia and get paid for it. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe, leave a comment, and write a review. If you know of someone who could benefit from listening to this podcast, consider sending them today's episode and let them know why they should check it out. If you know of someone who you think should be interviewed on the show, or generally want to get in contact with me, shoot an email over to matt@gradschoolsucks.com. That's matt@gradschoolsucks.com to get in contact with me. As always, I'm your host, Matt Carlson, and I look forward to bringing you another great episode next week. Stay classy, grad students.
All right. So, first question, Savannah, what is your superpower?
Well, I've been doing a lot of personal self-development lately in the last few years. And I've learned that, your superpower can also be your kryptonite. But I tend to be extremely, I'm empathetic, but in a way that I can kind of tell how people are feeling before they even express it verbally. And I've figured that out, and I can sort of start to feel that myself. But I've had to learn how to manage my own feelings when I'm around other people and I'm kind of experiencing their anxiety or their anger or whatever it may be. But I think it can be a superpower, especially in terms of work, in the industry. So I'm trying to frame it that way.
Absolutely.